Hello, I'm Dahl Russell, and today I'll be talking about an evocative tone picture by a composer known for his sense of the exotic paired with luscious melody. The music of Alexander Borodin in the steppes of Central Asia. Alexander Borodin lived from 1833 to 1887 and was best known in his lifetime as a respected and well-known chemist. He was known for his work with aldehydes, benzene derivatives, and organic halogens. His work on nucleophilic displacement of chlorine by fluorine in benzoyl chloride and related reactions were actually referred to in scientific circles as the Borodin reaction. His last publication involved the identification of urea in animal urine. This identification is still important today, as the presence of urea in the blood and other organs is still tested for as an indicator in many health issues. His son-in-law was also a chemist who succeeded him and continued his scientific work. Borodin said that, quote, "Music is a pastime, a relaxation from other work," unquote, and told his friend, quote, "I am a Sunday composer who strives to remain obscure," unquote. He also famously said that respectable people do not write music or make love as a career. How frustrating for many musicians before and since that they may devote their entire energy and life to music and may never compose music to equal Borodin's popularity or success. So while musical prodigies are often judged by high achievement at an early age, clearly Borodin may not have been an early bloomer, but he was a genius, and not just a musical genius, with his brain operating in top form in multiple fields. Arguably, the creativity of his musical mind may very well have been an asset in his science, and still today, many scientists regard music as a relaxation and an avocation. It is worth mentioning here that with his primary work and focus on another career, his musical output is quite small by comparison with most composers, and perhaps importantly, he recycled musical themes amongst his few works. Most of his orchestral themes can be found in earlier piano works, but he certainly is in the company of many great composers in both regards, basing larger works on initial piano works and recycling melodies in multiple formats. So I think it helps us understand his work to say that Borodin had very few musical ideas, but we're fortunate that the musical ideas he did have were so appealing and notably so original. He is one of the composers that permanently has set the bar for Western music's method of portraying Orientalism. Little is known about Borodin's early musical life. As a youth in the 1840s, it was considered a mark of accomplishment for young men and women to have musical training and even to do a little composition. The access to a piano or musical instruments itself connoted a certain level of wealth and status of the family. By the time he was known in scientific circles, he was also known by many musicians as well. He met Mily Balakirev in 1862 at the age of 29 and studied composition with him, completing his first symphony within 7 years, and Balakirev conducted the premiere. He completed his second symphony within the next 6 years at the same time that he was working on an opera, Prince Igor, which contains most of his well-known and loved melodies. This opera was not completed during his life. Borodin was avidly interested in absolute music, as opposed to programmatic music, where the program of the story being told is told through the music. Absolute music does not follow a prescribed storyline, but simply exists as music on its own. Here he was, in the high point of the Romantic era when everything was about legends and musical historic storytelling, and he was open about identifying himself with absolute music. As a member of the group of musicians known as the Russian Five, also known as the Mighty Five or Russia's Mighty Fist, the debate between absolute music and program music was a heated topic worthy of lifelong enmity. To complicate matters, he also believed in the importance of chamber music. While his musical mentor and circle were all very hostile to chamber music, they believed it to be inferior to orchestral work. It is said that Borodin's musical themes and textures are based on his admiration of the works of Mendelssohn, and so it's quite possible that Mendelssohn's seriousness of purpose in chamber music was an influence in his willingness to stand against his friends to champion chamber work. At a time when musicians and their work could be shunned and shut out for theoretical disagreements, it is a mark of his esteem that he remained part of the musical circle despite these differences. And it's probably also worth asking ourselves, did he get a free pass on some level because of his renown as a scientist? If an esteemed scientist rises to a level of having the Tsar commission his musical work, and his work is popular, and it's hummable, are they going to part ways with him over music theory? I think this is similar to when in the past few years Paul McCartney wrote a symphony. About 2 years ago, he came out with a big orchestral work based on the ocean. So, the lifelong orchestral musicians and composers may not have thought much of his orchestral work on its own, but they still worked with him and produced and promoted his symphony for a whole tangle of complex reasons that might have nothing to do with the work itself. So similarly, we may never know the exact place of Borodin within the Five, especially given the things he said about music as a profession. It is most likely that what united them was bigger than any division of theory or profession. They were all united in trying to create music that was distinctly Russian in terms of composition, structure, and sound. The piece I'm discussing today was only his third major completed orchestral work. It was written after the unsuccessful first draft of his Second Symphony. So at the time he wrote this, he was working on 3 major works simultaneously: the opera Prince Igor, major revisions of his Second Symphony, and this piece in the steppes of Central Asia. This work was not only commissioned for a specific high-profile event, but with a very specific purpose in mind: Tableau Vivant, living tableau. These were very popular throughout Europe in the early and mid-1800s. The idea was for people to pose in costumes and setting to replicate famous paintings. It didn't require the talent of acting or singing, which were often still considered professions of ill repute, but it displayed finery of set, costumes, and lighting. On a small scale, a lovely young woman could dress herself as an admired painting of a great beauty. On the public scale, whole communities could come together. There were often competitions of tableaux vivants. Obviously, the bigger the scope of the painting, the more adventuresome the tableau. In 1977, when Queen Elizabeth II of England had her Silver Jubilee, new coins were minted, commemorative mugs and goods of all sorts were created and sold, and there were official celebrations and street parties. In 1880, in Russia, it was the Silver Jubilee of Alexander II. Similar celebrations were planned. Many tableaux vivants were planned with commissioned music to accompany them. So this work of Borodin was meant to depict a tableau of a Russian caravan traveling east across the horizon of sandy steppes. The steppes could be traveled during Borodin's time, an exotic vacation for the very wealthy to come back with wondrous stories to tell. This rough program was ripe with fantasy. The Russian steppes between Russia and China, or also called the high desert of Eurasia, was a vast expanse of land that rises in a sort of natural staircase to the rooftop of the world in Nepal. To an imperialist Russia, the steppes were a potential bag of riches and, at the very least, more land to potentially conquer. To the people of Russia, the steppes captured the imagination, leading to a far east of wild unknown. Now, given his attachment to absolute music, this commission may have been a musical gauntlet of sorts, because the nature of the intended use is programmatic by design. But as fate would have it, this production and much of the Jubilee celebration was canceled after an attempted assassination. Remember, this is not too separate in time from the time that Queen Victoria also lived through a public assassination attempt. Lincoln's was later in 1865. Fortunately, this piece of music was able to be performed separately as a concert work as part of the Russian Opera Orchestra's season that same year, 1800. On its own, as tune-filled absolute music, it was immediately popular, and it has remained a regular part of concert programming ever since. In the Steppes of Central Asia, the music of Alexander Borodin. Enjoy.